Uh, Charles Moscowitz here. Welcome to the program. Michael D. Shaw is my guest, as is my habit on Fridays at 3 p.m. By the way, if you happen to be listening live, you could call in at 508 928 5255. That number again, 508 928 5255. So, Mike, I'd like to discuss a broad range of issues, but I want to start by talking about the general thesis of my soon to be released book, The Anti Semitic Spirit. I hope to have it out before the end of the year,
Wow,
if not
great.
sooner. It's almost done. I've got 30,000 words in the can already. So the thing is rolling off the page. And it has been accelerated by this recent event, of course, on January 6th in Israel. Jewish life is
October 7th.
October 7th. Thank you. I can't get dates right in my head.
Oh, and there's so many of these big dates now. It's
Yeah, and it's ugly. And I just over 1,000 Jews slaughtered on one day, the largest death toll for Jews since the Nazi Holocaust. And yet, a lot of that not only gets forgotten very quickly, but it unleashed what I would call an anti-Semitic spirit that is not unprecedented. It happens anytime Israel is involved in any kind of altercation. But it seems to have permeated much further this time, in that some of the old left and the young left now, people who were involved in the pussy hat rallies, the anti-Trump types, they're all now worse than Hamas. Hamas doesn't even call for the complete destruction of Israel. They want to see Israel completely wiped off the map. I mean, it's a genocidal impulse, and they may deny that, but you can just see it on their faces. This
what else
intense,
is meant by from the river to the sea?
Right. That's exactly right. And every Jew would be annihilated. They say, "Oh, we're going to live in peace there." Yeah, right. And the reason I'm calling it the anti-Semitic spirit, in a sense, inspired by Dr. E. Michael Jones's book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, a book that's over 1,000 pages that I've read from cover to cover, and which actually says very little about Jews. There are only a few Jews in the book. It says nothing about Judaism itself. And the Jews in the book are sort of these kind of bad actor cultural figures like Woody Allen and Philip Roth. It's not really about Jews. It's about people who had been heretics for the Catholic Church and, of course, Protestants. And it goes into a very interesting and lengthy history of the battle between Catholics and Protestants, which I learned a lot from reading. But basically, the premise is that anyone who disagrees with his very narrow vision of what is Catholic is a Judaizer and ultimately should be viewed as a Jew, even though Jews have very little of anything to do with any of it. And that's because we are a revolutionary spirit. Judaism is, according to his thesis, revolutionary. Thus, you can link every revolution in history to the Jews, including the American Revolution, which I told him I'd be happy to take credit for as a Jew. But, it's, in other words, and the reason we're revolutionary is because 2,000 years ago, the ancient Judeans did not believe in Jesus as the Messiah, and they recommended to the Romans that Jesus be executed. That's why. That's what it comes down to. Because of that, we're in a constant state of revolution. It puts aside the fact that Judaism as a faith and as a people has its own raison d'etre. It has nothing to do with Jesus or anyone else. It's a covenantal faith that's not based on religion, that's based on God and based on the Torah, and belief in God and belief in the moral and ethical precepts of the Torah, which are the very essence of order, or what he calls logos. And it's very much against revolution, if you will. But yet, this idea of the Jewish revolutionary spirit is what animates anti-Semitism. You don't even have to have Jews. It's just whatever bad is going on in the world, it's somehow because of the Jews, because we're in rebellion, because we did not, in his case, recognize Jesus, but in the case of the left, it's because we stand for traditional values. Karl Marx wrote the infamous pamphlet on the Jewish question, which essentially scientized anti-Semitism, in that the Jew stands for what he said, quote, self-interest, huckstering, and money. In other words, we as a people stand for the individual, the self-interest, the individual under God, created in the image of God. Huckstering is just another word for trading goods and services and ideas and intellectual property and, engaging with each other. And money, of course, is the medium by which we can conduct certain trade. That's a natural. If you don't have money, you're going to find a way to invent money. It's not something unique to Jews. I mean, it's something that every human society, from the most primitive on up, needs money. You have to have a form of money in order to exchange goods and services. Otherwise, you can't. Nothing, and barter is not sufficient for anybody to live on. So today you have an alliance of Jew haters who are against Judaism for, in a sense, I suppose, spiritual reasons as opposed to literal reasons. The Hamas and the Arabs and the Palestinians, they cannot tolerate the idea of a Jewish state on their border. And it's particularly because it's Jewish. They've accustomed themselves to the fact that Christianity drove them out of Spain in the 17th century and drove them out of the Balkans in the 18th and 19th century. But they can't abide the idea of a Jewish state. And it's because Judaism threatens their entire, I would contend, with due respect, backward way of life. This authoritarian system by which all people submit to this distant, unknowable God, and that they submit to the rule of that God as interpreted by powers on earth. In that sense, Islam is very similar to communism and Nazism. It's an earthly faith. It's a faith that in the second half of the life of Muhammad, the first half is great. Believe in God, believe in moral standards. It's like a split personality with Islam, because the second half is physical military conquest of the entire planet. It was the world's first modern world order, world government experiment. And Judaism stands in the way of that. Israel stands in the way of that because it represents sovereignty. It represents independence.
Well, so does Christianity. I mean,
but it does. But that's right.
Yeah.
It's right. It does, and particularly Israel, right in their midst, is a free, democratic, prosperous, organic society where individuals have rights, where all of these institutions threaten their authoritarian view, and they have found an alliance with the international left, which hates Judaism for two reasons. Number one, because we believe in God, at least theoretically. And number two, because we're capitalists. We believe in the right to ownership of property, the right to trade, and the right to huckster, if you will, the right to store value in the form of money. These things are obstacles to their world order view. And they are all aligned with this international order, which really is not pro-Israel. So you've got this slaughter of Jews, and all of a sudden everybody instead forgets about that, and they focus on the fact that Israel's defending itself. And they're lying, and they're making all these accusations. Oh, the Israelis are indiscriminately bombing, which is a lie. E. Michael Jones, Israel is too afraid, he's criticizing, because they're afraid to invade Gaza, because they're weak, he says. So they invaded Gaza. Now they're bombing, throwing missiles at hospitals, which turned out to be untrue.
Right.
Now they're killing children. I mean, these kinds of blasphemous lies can only be motivated by this twisted spirit, this anti-Semitic spirit, that would cause someone to lie like that. And what does he think? The Israelis are sitting in their situation room. Let's see, where are the children? We should bomb over here because there are children there. I mean, this is unfortunately Israel is trying to avoid killing innocent people. They're advising people to go into a safe zone in the southern part of Gaza, which they're doing. They're sending in humanitarian aid into that safe zone. They're screening the trucks to make sure the terrorists aren't using it to smuggle in weapons. And they're screening the people going south to make sure the terrorists aren't hiding amongst people. And then they are very methodically and very carefully finding the tunnels and destroying them. They're doing it through a very, very well combined effort of land troops who are moved into positions and the Air Force, which then comes in and drops a bomb on the tunnel. They're not going to go into the tunnel. That would be suicide. So instead, they blast it with bombs to destroy it. And now they are starting to turn the tide. I do think that Israel is going to win the war at this point. I don't think Israel is going to be destroyed. I know I said that last week. And I think partially that is to the credit of the United States because of our major aircraft carriers off the coast of Israel and Lebanon.
Right.
I thank this government for doing that. It hasn't cost American lives. I don't think the United States should get involved militarily. I don't think Israel wants them to be involved. Israel can do this job. But it does help to have at least one country in the world let the enemy of Israel know that they've got their back. And so, as an American, I am grateful for that we support the state of Israel. I don't think we should get involved in a war, but we are lending enough support that Israel is now free to go in and very methodically and very carefully do this necessary job in Gaza, which is to get rid of this terrorist group. And once they do that, Israel is going to be a lot more secure. I don't know how Gaza will be governed afterwards. I don't think Israel wants to occupy Gaza. They would have, if they did, they would have. They did in the beginning.
They left.
Exactly.
In 2005.
Exactly. And so but they'd like to see some kind of an administration there that is willing to live peaceably alongside Israel and stop the missiles and the terror tunnels and the gas bombs and the hang gliders. That's all they're expecting. Their expectations are very modest and reasonable. So I don't know how that's going to happen, but at least Israel will have removed the threat that exists now there. And when they do, Israel is going to be a lot safer. People hopefully can go back home to the communities near the border of that region and not worry about people hang gliding in and chopping the babies' heads off. Anyway, what say you, Mike?
Let me draw an analogy here. It's pretty well known that when Gaza was emptied of Israelis, including literally some dragged out of there that didn't want to leave.
Exactly.
Among other things, a very profitable fruit export enterprise was left in place in these greenhouses. I think there were 100 or more of these greenhouses. And they were immediately turned into military installations. So what seems to be going on here, beyond simple hatred, is this almost helpless situation where no matter what happens in the Black ghetto and everything we didn't do to preserve the family, whatever, it's very easy to blame racism and whites. So I don't know what percentage of the Palestinians have this mentality. I know they voted for Hamas, but nothing's going to happen in a positive sense until the people get control of themselves.
I agree.
The greenhouses to turn into military installations, there's something sick going on here. And there are multiple reports saying that Hamas is killing its own civilians to add up higher the body count. So you're dealing with
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
yeah. So you're dealing with a situation that can't be analyzed according to the nice, polite way that we look at things. Unfortunately, it's not helped by the fact that a surprising number of quote Jews who are leftists still seem to be on the side of Hamas. It also doesn't help that you have people like Dershowitz that finally are almost starting to realize that maybe it wasn't a good idea to identify with the left. There's no rational reason why Jews should have ever been on the left, if you want to go that far.
Mm.
So I'm not impressed by these 11th hour conversions because, as far as I know, Dershowitz is still going to vote for Democrats.
I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. I know that a couple of people that I know who are left-wing Jews, they are just, wringing their hands right now. They don't understand how this could have happened, that the left is so anti-Israel and that's supporting Hamas. And I mean, I'm not at all surprised. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they just have been out of the loop.
Well, what am I missing here? When was the left not anti-Semitic?
Well, of course. I mean, look, as I said, I mean, they despise Israel for the two reasons. Judaism stands for belief in God, which they despise. They're talking about revolution. They're in a revolution against God. And secondly, they are anti-capitalist. Israel is a relatively capitalist country, not as capitalist as we are, but it stands for free enterprise, individual rights, property, all of the institutions that make us free and that threaten them and their bizarre view of creating a one world ant colony. So, yeah, I mean, they've made alliance with Hamas. It's interesting. I mean, there's this one group, I mean, Queers for Hamas. I don't know how queers are going to do in Gaza, but I don't think too well. I don't know.
Well,
It's like,
what's funny about all that is they've interviewed these people,
yeah,
and there's video on everything now. They've interviewed these people who genuinely seem to be ignorant of how homosexuals are treated in that culture, even though there's videos you can easily find of homosexuals being thrown off buildings and then, by the way, stoned afterwards just to make sure.
yeah, apparently including a very high level Hamas militant, from what I
Yes,
understand.
yes.
Yeah, so they are ignorant. They don't read the same information we read. They live in this bizarre bubble. I mean, it makes me think of the late Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld and his talk about the dumbing down of America through education. I mean, that's why you have at Harvard and at these other schools people signing this agreement that Israel's to blame for the slaughter of 1,400, 1,500 Jews on
Now let's talk about that.
October
What's
6th.
going to happen now? What's going to happen? The brand has been destroyed. All right. There still hasn't been an affirmative statement by this affirmative action Harvard president.
Right.
Anything
Horrible.
other than the mealy-mouthed remarks. What happens to the donors? All right.
A lot of them are up and leaving is what's happening.
Well, okay, but I'll tell you what I thought was, again, funny is the only word. Bill Ackman, who's a rich Jewish guy who graduated from Harvard some decades ago,
yeah,
writes this ridiculously long letter, open letter, to President Gay of Harvard. Why are you doing this? And isn't it terrible that, let us reason together. There's no reason. It's not going to be used. This is an institution that fell apart. Now, maybe the good news, and maybe Blumenthal would appreciate this, go ahead and destroy the brand of the Ivies. Go ahead and destroy the notion that you have to go to college. And maybe there's going to be some changes here. How many of these Gen X's and millennials are burdened with ridiculous student debt, even if some of it is forgiven, have trouble finding jobs, can't buy homes. Some of them are starting to wise up that this education thing was
Yeah.
a giant hoax.
I know they
And
majored in women's studies or something. It's like, I mean, even Bill Maher the other day did a monologue. College is a waste. Don't go. It's like it's futile. It's worthless. And I think that they are taking a hit in terms of the brand, especially the Ivies. They no longer are what they were. When you have these people signing these letters condemning Israel the next day, I don't think that that's based on hatred of Jews. I think it's just ignorance. They are so.
there's a lot of ignorance.
And then finally, I mean, thank goodness, thank God, you had a couple of people stand up and say, "Hey, we're going to identify these people, and they're not going to get hired." And all of a sudden, people are hopefully, some of them anyway, are responding by saying, "What are we doing? I mean, what did we? Why are we saying this? It's defamatory. It's wrong. It's just ridiculous." And they're backing away.
Unfortunately, there aren't enough. All right. Academia is a destroyed institution across the board. We can talk about the Ivies all we want, but an incident that occurred only a few miles from where I live, by the by, was that Paul Kessler guy that got killed
It's
in
killed.
that demonstration. All right, here's what's happening with that. Number
Yeah.
one, why the hell this guy got involved to that extent, I don't know, but he did.
Hmm.
So some ruckus occurred between these two, with, of course, conflicting testimony, and immediately you don't trust law enforcement. There's video of everything now. They claim that they haven't been able to find definitive video. Well, the guy who did the assault, and maybe they were pushing and shoving back and forth, and maybe this guy unfortunately fell back, cracked his head open, whatever,
Right.
has been identified by people looking at photos and videos
Right.
as a professor at one of the junior colleges, Moore Park College. All right. The
Hmm.
Ventura County Sheriff's Department still has not said anything definitive, as always happens, by the way. And we've talked about this a few times. Any high profile killing is never properly investigated and goes out of the news cycle within a few days. I don't care if they kill one guy or 75, they're never investigated sufficiently.
I agree.
So it is a testimonial to the people who live here that they were able to identify this guy by look at photos, and someone who went to Moore Park College knew who this professor was, and so on. So it's appalling how this is being handled. It's stupid as hell that this guy got involved to that extent. What does he expect when passions are flowing to that extent? Was it really worth it getting killed? The virtue of prudence comes in here.
Right.
But
I agree.
it did happen. It's extremely unfortunate. And so what occurs? They carry the guy away. These demonstrations continue unabated. And for those that aren't familiar with that part of Thousand Oaks, California, all that is a big intersection. There's nothing there. It's retail. There's auto dealers, but it's not like some big historic site. It's just a large intersection where apparently demonstrations occur. All right. But pivoting back to what we were saying, how much of the left being anti-Semitic is based on self-hating Jews of the Frankfurt School and other places that fuel the fire somehow? Obviously, it's not all their fault.
No, but yeah, you're right. Well, the Frankfurt School, which basically updated Marx's conflict theory, which is one of the three pillars of sociology, to critical theory. That's what this whole motivation is about, this look at the world as a bifurcated
Yeah.
society where you have, the
Oppressors and
oppressed
victims.
and the oppressors, um, which is really, not accurate, especially when you get into claiming that entire ethnic groups and peoples are oppressors.
Right.
I mean, I noticed that I'm right now. I'm studying. I'm in college. I'm in community college, getting a degree, and one of the classes I'm taking, very interestingly, is African American literature. And in that class, I read James Baldwin's book, "Toward the what is it? The Fire Next Time." Really interesting thinker. And he says that, look, when he was younger, he flirted briefly with Nation of Islam, and he understood their appeal to the black community, but he realized that the basic message, and this was after having lunch with Elijah Muhammad, the head of it, because he was a prominent writer at the time, that all white people are descended from the devil, and this kind of talk, and that the world is divided between the devils and the blessed people who are all blacks. And it's like all of a sudden he's like realizing what this did to his psyche, what this does to anyone's psyche. Pretty soon, what is it? The dishwasher, the doorman, the waiter, the cab driver. Are these people all devils? What? It's like, this is how I'm going to look at the world. Everyone who happens to be white now is a devil. And he realized how corrupting that was to reality, how corrupting it was to his own soul to
Yeah.
categorize people in that way. And that's what critical theory does. It takes entire groups of people. This is what Marx did to create a dialectic, a conflict between entire categories of people. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't oppressors. I have argued that there is an elite in the world. It's not based on any ethnicity at all. They tend to be, frankly, Anglo-American elites, frankly, from the days of Cecil Rhodes, but that they do oppress the world, or they seek to. But it's not based on an ethnicity or a religion. It's based upon common interests by very powerful people who try to manipulate the world. So I do believe that. Maybe I don't know if that makes me a critical theorist. I don't think so.
Um,
But
well, in a broad definition of it, I guess, but um, I think the critical theory more applies to the socialist way of looking at things. And I never understood the appeal where you get otherwise smart guys. Like these Frankfurt School people were not stupid,
no,
but they
they were
felt
brilliant.
good.
Social
And,
scientists, yeah.
yeah. Um,
Unfortunately,
so
most of them were Jewish too, by the way.
yeah,
But
well, that's what I mentioned.
yeah,
And
exactly.
um, it's so this is empowers the thought process of people like Jones,
Well, that's
who
the
can
problem. I mean, if you say that a guy, somebody like Jones is going to say, you see,
yeah,
Judaism is a revolutionary faith. When look, first of all,
but
you
those
know,
people were not religious. Let's be
no,
clear
they
about
they were they were heretical, if
it.
anything. I mean, to the basic premise of Judaism. And I mean, I've written about this. I mean, the heresies that bedeviled the Jewish body, starting with the false messiahship of Shabtai Zvi. It's too big a subject to get into right now, but they inherited that movement. They sought to overthrow the Torah. They were an antinomian movement in that they sought to overthrow the laws, the will, the rules, the ethics, the morals that were given by God when God gave the world the Torah as a way to bring about a messianic age. I mean, Shabtai Zvi publicly debased and degraded the Torah
Right.
in ways that are really bad. And he was excommunicated for that. But his idea was that if we can sin and create an epidemic of sin in the world, we're going to bring the world down to such a low point that we'll have to have a Messiah come to save the world. I mean, I know that sounds bizarre, but that was the faith of his followers, the Sabbateans. And then in the next generation, about 100 years later came this guy Jacob Frank in Europe, who was even worse. I mean, he brought in like sexual immorality into it, and he had all kinds of really perverted practices and really disgusting perversions as a way to bring about this messianic age, to basically destroy the image of God, to debase and degrade the godly aspect of life. You know, the instead of aspiring to be more holy, they were aspiring to be less holy. Now, of course, in Christianity, you had similar movements. You had the Illuminati, you had Satanism. I mean, it's not unique to Judaism. But these movements, which all kind of intersect, are, I'm convinced, the belief system of the elites. Not all, but if you scratch the surface, this is what they're about. Now, there are people who are in the conspiracy world, and I'm putting a tin hat on here, who will say that these people secretly are practicing satanic ritual and they're doing all kinds of crap that we can't even imagine. I don't know if that's true or not, because how would I know? I mean, I don't know anybody like that. I think it probably, though, might have maybe a little scintilla of truth to it. You know, it's sort of like if you look at what's going on there, they're promoting this kind of corruption, and they're doing it secretly.
Well, certainly the promotion of the child trafficking
Yes,
would help support some
it
of
does,
these.
and that's a much bigger scandal than people know. And I know that. Look, I'm not a fan of the QAnon theory. However, there was a scintilla of truth to that when they talked about elites engaging in satanic ritual with children. Let's just put it that way.
Adrenochrome.
Yeah. I think that that's something, people are going to throw a hissy fit over even mentioning that. Well, how about we do a little research? How about you get legitimate reporters? I would point to both Liz Crokin and Ben Swan, two legitimate mainstream journalists, both of whom had jobs. I think in the case of Liz, I think it was with CBS. I mean, they were doing stories, and they basically fell onto this story and started looking into it and discovered horrible things. And as a result, they have both been removed and denounced from society. Why is that? What are they afraid of? I mean, let's take a look at this stuff, before we throw it all out. Now, I think that the QAnon thing went overboard. I don't endorse some of the weird stuff. I mean, I don't think that JFK Jr. is still alive. I mean, they went into some real, rabbit holes. However, the basic thesis is one that is at least worth looking into.
Yeah, and there's just a lot going on, and the suppression of those two journalists, very analogous to what happened to Peter McCullough. And in fact, in his case, it was even worse. He was one of the top cardiologists in the world, and then gets canceled.
And Robert Malone and a bunch of others. These guys were respected in their field, and they were longtime practitioners of medicine. They actually were out there in the field working with patients, unlike Fauci and them. They actually saw what was going on. I mean, even Judy Moscowitz, I mean, I know that she's been denounced also, but she had some things to say. I mean, Sandra Gold, she actually went to jail, I mean, because of some of her comments.
Simone Gold,
thank you.
Yeah.
And the doctors in white, they were trying to blow the whistle on all the lies that were surrounding the COVID epidemic. And they were all denounced by this government. And, it's, I say, look, the reason we have a First Amendment is so that we can investigate. Let them investigate, let them present their positions, and then have a discussion about it in public where all sides can be heard. That's all I would expect. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say.
But they're trying to get jail time for this guy who's been mocking Hillary Clinton.
I think he actually had to go to jail, didn't he?
You have this absurd situation with this judge in New York, his wife, his clerk. And by the way, I've been in courtrooms a few times. I have never seen the clerk sitting right next to the judge like that, sending notes to him in such a
Yeah.
manner.
Meanwhile, she's at a fundraiser for Charles Schumer, having a picture taken with him.
Right.
That's whatever happened to the Logan Act. I remember for years we heard the left crying about Karen Ann Conway making a few comments under the Trump's administration that seemed to violate the Logan Act. Now all of a sudden you have a real conflict with a judge who is going to strip President Trump of his businesses and his children of their business in New York State, businesses that have contributed enormously to New York State. And where there were no charges brought by anybody, their only witness is the scumbag convict, convicted liar Michael Cohen. I mean, and nobody says a peep about it.
But what was the crime anyway? I mean, even if Cohen's telling the truth that the value of these properties were overstated, the loans were paid back, no one complained. So it's a classic example of a process crime where no one's hurt, nothing's actually wrong.
And also real estate agencies, the whole industry does this all the time. I mean, it's just, I'm not saying it's right, but the point is if you go to Zillow, for example, and look at the value of a piece of property, it's always inflated when they're trying to sell it. Of course. And then you let the market basically take hold and the price eventually finds
a level. You have to get an appraisal when you're trying to take out a home loan. An independent appraiser comes down and gives you what the value is. So
right.
The fact
and then conversely, if you have a property that you want it to be assessed for tax purposes, you take steps to reduce the value so that you're not having. That's perfectly legal. I mean, there's a lawyer in Long Island who's advertising with billboards. This is what he does. He'll go to your local assessor and have your property reduced so you can save money in taxes. Perfectly legal. I mean, it is what it is. That's real estate. But they're going after Trump.
So why? I mean, is this the way the system works? You allow this imbecile judge to let this thing play out. It's going to be overturned if he's even found guilty.
And they know it, but they don't care. They just want to get another day of publicity, another day of media, and of course you get Lester Holt and them all giving this big time prime time space, and that rotten attorney general, who by the way apparently herself is pretty well to do based on possible inside connections, is just
real estate fraud in her resume.
Yeah, exactly.
She was able to accumulate all this property based on very questionable circumstances. And the other thing was, you may have seen that Marilyn Mosby, who was Baltimore, essentially district attorney,
well, another Soros,
jail time for perjury. So it's coming down slowly, but the problem is most people don't have an infinite time scale, right? And that is where the bad guys always benefit. Generally speaking, truth will out, but you and I don't have 50 years to wait while it happens.
No, I mean, look, all of this stuff is just, they know that eventually it's going to all get thrown out. All the stuff against Trump, it's all based on lies. However, they are going to use it the way to stop him from running for office, to try to damage his brand as we move toward the election. And that's all this is. So far, it hasn't worked, but this is like last July, people, it's a minor story in this country, but it's an example that we should look to. The election in Cambodia, right? The opponent to the regime, which had been in place for 30 years, he was winning. All of a sudden, under house arrest, they cook up some fake charges. Suddenly, he's removed from the ballot. And then the candidate, the president who's been in serving for 30 years, he wins the election and he turns the reins over to his son. Yeah. So, that's what this is. That's what we're looking at. Another left-wing agenda where the opponent is not debated properly, but instead they try to convict him. They try to put him in jail. They try to remove him. They have not been successful so far. Apparently, in Minnesota, you had an honest judge throw an attempt out where there was a group that tried to sue to keep Trump off the ballot.
Oh, for this 14th Amendment stuff?
Yeah, which is completely bogus. In Colorado, you had a corrupt DA have testimony in the state legislature where they showed the film of Trump speaking at the January 6th rally, and they sliced out the part where he said, yeah, please protest peacefully and constitutionally, and then let's not fall into this trap. Now, we could talk about whether Trump should have been there at all. He probably shouldn't have been in retrospect. However, there it is. They're doing the same bull crap that they've done in every day of his presidency. They're taking news and they're manufacturing it by creating a false narrative and false images, sort of like what Michael Jones is trying to do to the Jewish people. It's I think Americans are waking up to it and they're sick of it.
Well, there's a percentage, and I don't know what it is, that believe in institutions per se. And I suspect it goes back to the educational system, where the first thing you learn is to take orders, respect authority, and have no critical thinking skills. And I think that they have succeeded admirably in producing a few generations of people that refuse to look at reality. Okay, one of the big successes of the COVID fiasco was, surely you're not telling me that the public health establishment is corrupt. Well, yeah, I actually am. All right, and this is not anything new, by the way. The public health establishment has been worthless for at least 30 years. Okay. But people get great comfort in thinking these institutions are still what they thought they were. It was only yesterday, the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs, tell me if you've heard this before, who's another affirmative action woke guy, is now telling Israel that they should back off because if they beat Hamas too badly, it will create more ill feeling. How does some moron like this?
I mean, he sounds like he's even worse than Mark Milley. I don't know if that's possible.
Look, well, okay, but see, you're not cynical enough here. When people were saying all we need to do is replace Fauci and replace Rochelle and replace Francis Collins, I said no. They're going to be worse people replacing them because that's the pipeline. What? You think the guy directly below Fauci is going to be some reasonable person? No way. How would he have gotten that? So it's a complete destruction of institutions, and people have a very hard time dealing with it.
Although I think that most Americans are becoming aware of how corrupt the whole rotten health dictatorship was. I mean, I don't think that we're going to go back to that. I think they've sent out a few trial balloons and nobody played ball with it. I think you still see people out there, I know people who do this, that are still wearing the mask. They're getting shots every friggin' day.
Yeah.
But there's very, very few. It's a cult. I call it the Branch Covidians. I mean, at this point. And I think that the vast majority of Americans have moved on. Pfizer has taken a major hit in the stock market because less than 3% of people are doing the latest vaccine, and very few people are having their children do it. And I just think that people have moved on. I think people do know in their heart of hearts that this rotten establishment was dishonest and was corrupt.
But look what it took. Okay, there were voices at the beginning, and Michael Yaden wasn't the only one, saying this is wrong, it's not going to work, there's this problem, that problem, and so on. but there weren't many people that were speaking up either. And most of the medical establishment went along with it.
Right. Oh,
Now,
they went.
what's really funny, try finding a primary care physician that's recommending the vaccines. You won't find them.
No, they don't do it anymore. They won't say no to it. I had a talk recently with a primary care doctor who did not recommend the vaccine, but when I brought up whether or not she thought it was a good idea, she said yes, she did, but only because I asked. I mean, they're not going to come out and say this. So at least, I mean, there's some progress. And, by the way, I heard an interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently. I don't think it was with Joe Rogan, but it was someone. He mentioned that he had asked the Biden administration for a little extra Secret Service protection, given the fact that there have been several assassination attempts already, and that his father and uncle were murdered. You would think that the administration would do that, even though they do it automatically a few days before an election, but they have done it when requested by candidates on all sides. Obama got Secret Service protection the day he announced, 2 years out, because he asked for it, and it's just done because that's the tradition. If you want it, you get it. But he's been denied that, which is really venal by this administration. But in passing, he mentioned that Anthony Fauci, the government is spending $1 million a month on security for him and his family. I mean, he's not well liked. But the thing is, that's what he costs us.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because before COVID, I mean, Fauci has been screwing things up for a long, long time.
Yes.
It was within his agency, within NIAID, he was despised. But the only way that he kept going was he had his fingers on a lot of the grant money. Okay, Collins was not as despised because he was sort of above it all. But Fauci was right there. Okay, now here's the thing. He doesn't have that stroke anymore, right? There are a lot of people that hate the guy. And I mean, but why he should get government security is a whole other point. He doesn't work for the government anymore.
Something. He'd be a lot more secure if he just went away, stopped doing interviews, stopped agitating. He can't help it. He can't stop trying to get in front of the camera.
Well, I think RFK Jr. makes a good point.
Yeah,
I'm not denying that Fauci's a target, and you know what, he should be. But I would think that RFK.
Well, I mean, we're not calling for Fauci to be in any way harmed.
No. But I mean, there's good reason why people hate the guy.
Yes. Right?
But certainly, if you have a family history of assassinations, that's the prima facie case for getting this kind of protection. And the fact that it's being denied
is really despicable, and it's just
it's despicable, but
petty.
His own miserable family is disowned.
They're all a bunch of they've fallen far. They've fallen
they're all
far
freeloaders.
Yeah, I mean that's right.
The biggest shock that people got was when Caroline Kennedy was briefly made ambassador, or was going to be made ambassador.
Yeah.
And she started speaking, and she sounded like it was what it sounded like to me, because I'm from LA. Right? It sounded like a high school girl deliberately trying to sound like a Valley girl. It was unbelievable.
Oh, I remember that. And that was, I think you're talking about when she briefly was going to run for the Senate in New York. It was horrible. It was a complete disgrace. She went away after that. It was just so bad. But she's like, I mean, I know we talked about Dershowitz. Dershowitz has gotten into social trouble in Martha's Vineyard because he defended Trump. All of a sudden, that's the playground for the ultra-rich left-wingers.
Yeah.
And he was at some kind of a dinner party with Caroline Kennedy, and she said, if I had known you were going to be here, I wouldn't have come. And that's what they're like. I mean, they live in this world. I mean, I don't know. It makes me think. I remember the late great Rush Limbaugh. He was on a cruise, I think in the Caribbean, and on that same ship was Carly Simon. And when she heard that Rush Limbaugh was in the boat, she literally became sick. I mean, what the hell? I mean, it's like, I mean, I kind of get it. Look, I grew up in that world. I grew up as a left wing, completely kind of spoiled, out of touch suburban kid. And looking back at it, I didn't know anything else. I never met anybody else. I didn't know what conservatives, anybody who wasn't in that world was like. I mean, I thought that they were probably some weird people who were living under a rock somewhere in, the South or just, it's just like it was so far out of my reach of understanding that I wouldn't have known how to respond to somebody who wasn't
But at
goose-stepping to
least
that view.
you finally got exposed to
I
real
did.
life. And I mean, how do you explain someone like Carly Simon, who was when this Limbaugh incident happened, was much older? How do you continue to live in a bubble for your entire life?
They all do. I mean, look, she's very wealthy. She's born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She's had everything handed to her. Look, I don't. She's made some good music, by the way. I'm
Yeah,
not criticizing that. She's got talent. I at one point I kind of liked her as a musician. I still do, I suppose. But there's an attitude and a belief and a reality that is completely hermetically sealed from the real truth, and she
well,
keeps it that way. They keep everything. They're in Martha's Vineyard, with the playground of the very rich left wingers. So they have Ron DeSantis of Florida sends up a small number of illegal
yeah, there were like
aliens,
50 of them, right?
and they immediately they don't know what to do. They're having a complete meltdown. So they give them all a nice box lunch, and they put them on a bus, and they deport them off the island, where they're put on a military base in Cape Cod. I
Yeah.
mean, it's they just and yet they somehow think that what they did was virtuous. And how could DeSantis do this? Right? He's doing a stunt. They kept telling us, and the media was reporting it that way. There was nobody. It was so out of. It was so tone deaf in terms of the world they're in. Meanwhile, if you go to Martha's Vineyard, they're desperate for employees. These were mostly the same type of people that are coming in illegally, young men.
Right.
They could have put them to work cleaning their gold-plated toilet seats, or mopping their floors with their tongues, or whatever other jobs they need. Right? They import people from Ukraine and Moldova and Romania every summer. They put them up in these what look like slave quarters to me, and they clean up their toilets, and they work them. They serve them all summer, and then they send them home. You'd think that maybe they could have made some space for these illegal alien guys coming in. I mean, they could have. They need people to do their work.
Well, right, but going back to that mentality, how much of it is that they're not that stupid, but now they realize that their whole life has been a lie, so they'd rather stay in that bubble. And I've encountered people like this.
Yeah.
Some people, friends of mine, frankly, who I'll never forget. We came back to LA. We had lunch some months ago with some a woman that we knew back when. And we're talking about different, whatever the subject is. And it comes down to COVID. And I very gently raise a couple of points. And she freaks out. She doesn't want to talk about this.
Oh my God! Yeah.
And this is someone who's not stupid, who actually does have some medical conditions. So I think that it's pride. It's all pride. I mean, Dershowitz is not stupid. He could have seen a long time ago where this thing was headed. but he became stayed being a reliable left-wing Jewish guy because that's what he's supposed to be.
Right.
And, it does not impress me at this point, that what, you're the prodigal son now? You're coming back. Okay, maybe you're the prodigal son, but what penance have you done, Alan? Maybe he thinks defending Trump is part of it. Or these silly articles by Dennis Prager. This is why the left is bad for Jews. Or really, thanks, Dennis. No one knew that until you wrote it. What a phony baloney that guy is.
Yeah, he strikes me that way too. I've never liked him.
Oh, well, I had the misfortune. I belonged to a health club many years ago.
Yeah.
And he came to the health club, and I'd read one of his columns, and I went up to him and said, "Well, Dennis, what do you think about so and so?" "Well, you can buy my book and read so and so." What horse's ass? You don't have the time to mix it up with the little people.
Yeah.
And by this paragon of moral virtue that's been divorced 2 or 3 times. And so, thank you very much. So I really don't have time for these people. And maybe there's going to be some red pilling going on that's going to be meaningful. A lot of people I've talked to about it thinks, yeah, it'll be 2%. But most of them are going to keep voting Democrat.
Yeah, and I don't really care. I mean, I think that what do you think about this last election, and what do you think about Trump's chances? I mean, I think that they have not fixed the rigged machines. They have not fixed the ballot harvesting and the mailings. They're still doing it, and even if Trump is even more supported, they're going to do it. I mean, why wouldn't they?
Fraud is all they have. But what's working in our favor is minority groups, the males, by the way, not the females, are coming over in some percentage to the conservative side. I think the reason that the Trump endorsed candidate in Kentucky didn't win was the guy didn't try to brush off the stench of McConnell as much as he should have.
That was strange, because I mean, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, they all won overwhelmingly, and they were all Republican except for Cameron, who did not. So what happened there?
I think he was too closely tied in with McConnell and was afraid, as a lot of these people are, you're going to have to make the full break. And I don't believe he did.
I get it.
And then they're trying to, raise up this abortion thing. That's going to be a big platform for the Democrats now. They're going to try to have this on the ballot in every state. Well, guess what? When Roe was overturned, this is what you have. Now it's up to the states. I'm not surprised at all. The way Ohio.
Although the law in Ohio, apparently, it was very deceptively phrased to the extent where it is now abortion is enshrined in the Ohio Constitution, and it can be done right up to the moment of birth and even afterwards. Did people know that that's what they were voting for?
Probably not, but the real hardcore like that approach. But that's a whole issue in itself.
Yeah.
Okay. The only explanation for this is really only two: is genocide of minorities, as proposed by Margaret Sanger. And the other thing is there's so many women that are filled with such hatred of themselves, their lives, the choices they've made. It's very easy and convenient to have this abortion. I mean, think about it. It's very difficult to get pregnant with all the birth control methods. So how many of them purposely get pregnant for the joy of having an abortion? No one goes down that road because it's too negative, but I'm sure that goes on. The self-hatred in people now is unbelievable. and nobody wants to talk about it, but it creates a lot of problems.
Yeah, but
Uh,
is that a majority of people? I mean, they are, there
I
are
don't think
women.
it's the majority, but
Yeah,
bad things can happen. What motivates Paul Kessler to get into a physical altercation with this pro-Hamas guy? What's the benefit? We will reason together. It's not going to happen.
the same thing
So,
happened in Brooklyn recently with this guy who was stabbed to death by a homeless guy, and he was an ultra liberal from Massachusetts, completely one of these completely woke people
yeah,
who thought that maybe he could have a conversation with this guy.
yeah.
Let's talk it out. Let's figure out. And then he was murdered, unfortunately. But is this a naive thing? I mean, it's sort of, it's like they think that maybe this goes to a certain element of the left where you have people who have this messiah complex. They wake up every day and they think they're like Moses. They're going to come down off the mountain and share their wisdom with the world.
Right.
I'm the great and powerful one. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to that little man behind the curtain. I am the great one. And they think that they're going to just, talk somehow because they're so great. They're going to talk to the guy wielding a knife, and he'll listen to them because he's wise and because he has some kind of great hidden knowledge.
Well, it's also because evil doesn't exist, right? You'd be surprised how many people there are who are atheists that believe that all they would have to do is go to the prisons of the United States and convince these poor misguided felons that stealing and killing is wrong. And then we would solve everything.
Right. That's right. That's the mentality.
So,
It's
so you can look at the Paul Kessler thing as a social Darwinism event. I mean, it's very sad, obviously, for the person and his family.
right,
But
of
what
course.
in the world are they thinking? You're not going to be able to reason with people who are unreasonable. They hate you. That's what motivates them. That's why they get up in the morning, is to hate Jews. That's it.
Yeah. I
And if you
remember I
go
remember this is
down
right
and
after
say,
9/11. You remember that
yeah,
Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl?
yeah,
He decided he would go to Pakistan to interview Al Qaeda,
yeah,
and he was captured and he was beheaded,
right.
unfortunately. And I remember at the time I was interviewing this Israeli guy who he said everybody in Israel knows that he was crazy. What is he thinking? It's like you don't go. It's like you're gonna. It's like a suicide mission. But yet he thought, oh, I'll go there and I'll reason with them, and we'll all sit down together at the table and wiggle our toes and sing kumbaya. I'm going to bring peace to the world. And it's just it doesn't really work that way. Anyway, so
No.
what do you have coming up, Mike, on your
Well,
Substack?
I had family here during the week, so I didn't have anything after my treason article. But one of the readers sent me an interesting thing. That book, None Dead Carl Treason, came out in 1964,
Oh yeah, sure.
and it was a self-published book that sold 7 million copies, which was incredible back
Yes.
then. Unbelievable accomplishment. And one of the guys said that he wanted to do a high school book report on None Dare Call It Treason in 64, 65, and the teacher wouldn't let him because it's political. But
Yeah.
even then, the schools were left wing. So it's a long time coming with this stuff. And now we're reaping it. It's very sad. Maybe we've turned the corner. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, again, I think of Dr. Sam Blumenfeld, the late Sam Blumenfeld, talking about this on my show for years. By the way, I need to talk to you about changing the time because Friday it's getting too close to Shabbos,
Right.
and so maybe could we do the show Thursday at 3 o'clock? Or are you busy then?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so what? We can't do it earlier on.
Well, it's becoming very hectic as
Okay.
because there's my family wants to be more observant, and there's all this
Yeah,
business.
okay.
So
Yeah, whatever it takes.
that's what I'd like to do then. So next
Yeah, we can
Thursday
discuss
at
this
3.
off camera, obviously, but
Whatever. But just so anybody listening can know that it's going to be
yeah,
Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Thursday at 3, be
Yes,
there or be square.
exactly. All right, Mike. Listen, thanks as always, and I'll talk to you then.
All right, take care.